A quiet September afternoon at Balmoral Castle turned into chaos when an unidentified drone breached royal security, heading straight for Princess Anne. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but the consequences would shake the foundations of royal protection forever. One guard's instinct, one split-second decision, and one terrifying moment that nearly changed British history. This is the true story of the day. The royal family came face to face with modern warfare's most unpredictable threat. The morning of September 14th, 2024, started like any other at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, had arrived 3 days earlier for the annual family gathering that followed the summer season. At 73 years old, she remained one of the hardest-working members of the royal family. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and dedication to duty, the castle grounds were peaceful, the late summer sun casting long shadows across the carefully manicured lawns and ancient oak trees that had stood guard over the estate for centuries. Security around Balmoral had always been tight, but it had been reinforced significantly since Queen Elizabeth's passing 2 years earlier. The estate held deep sentimental value for the royal family, serving as their private sanctuary away from the public eye. Armed protection officers patrolled the grounds in rotating shifts, while sophisticated surveillance systems monitored every entry point. Yet despite all the precautions, no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. Princess Anne had spent the morning reviewing correspondence in the castle's private study. She was scheduled to meet with estate managers at 2 o'clock to discuss land management issues affecting local farmers. It was the kind of practical, hands-on engagement that had defined her royal career. She believed in being useful, in making tangible differences rather than simply cutting ribbons and waving at crowds. Her schedule was packed as always, with barely a moment to spare between commitments. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, she decided to take a brief walk through the rose garden before her meeting. The gardens at Balmoral were spectacular this time of year, with late-blooming flowers adding splashes of color against the darker greens of approaching autumn. She wore a simple tweed jacket and comfortable walking shoes, her style as practical as her approach to royal duties. 2 protection officers accompanied her at a discreet distance, as protocol demanded, but the atmosphere was relaxed. This was supposed to be a safe space, a refuge from the constant demands and potential dangers of public life. Sarah Mitchell, one of the newer members of the Royal Protection Squad, walked approximately 20 feet behind Princess Anne, at 32 years old. Sarah had spent 8 years in the Metropolitan Police before being selected for the Elite Protection Unit. She was trained to notice everything, to process threats before they fully materialized, to act on instinct when seconds mattered. Her colleague, James Thornton, a veteran officer with 15 years of experience, maintained position on the opposite side, creating a triangle of protection around their charge. The first indication that something was wrong came as a faint buzzing sound, barely audible above the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Sarah's head snapped up immediately, her training kicking in before her conscious mind had fully processed the threat. Her eyes scanned the sky, searching for the source of the sound that didn't belong in this peaceful setting. James heard it too, his hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon as he also looked upward. Then they saw it, drone roughly 2 feet in diameter, was descending rapidly from the northeast, its 4 rotors creating that distinctive mechanical hum that had become increasingly common in urban areas, but had no place here. But this wasn't a recreational drone operated by some curious tourist hoping to catch a glimpse of the castle. Its flight pattern was too deliberate, too direct. It was moving with purpose, and that purpose appeared to be Princess Anne herself. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities in microseconds. Surveillance. Possible, but unlikely given the aggressive approach. A prank, too dangerous and sophisticated. The most terrifying possibility, the one that made her blood run cold, was that this drone carried hostile intent. In an age where technology had democratized warfare, a small drone could carry explosives, chemical agents, or even just a weapon designed to cause harm at close range. She had attended briefings on drone threats to high-profile individuals. She knew that terrorist organizations and lone actors had successfully used modified commercial drones in attacks around the world. Princess Anne, focused on examining a particularly beautiful specimen of rose, hadn't yet noticed the approaching threat. She was bent slightly forward, appreciating the deep crimson petals, completely unaware that danger was diving toward her at approximately 30 miles per hour. The drone was now less than 100 feet away and closing fast, descending at a sharp angle that would bring it directly to her position within seconds. Sarah didn't hesitate. Years of training compressed into a single moment of action. She sprinted forward, covering the 20 feet between herself and Princess Anne in less than 3 seconds. Her boots pounded against the gravel pathway, and she called out a warning even as she moved. Princess Anne looked up, startled by the urgency in Sarah's voice. But there was no time for explanations or questions. Sarah reached the princess, Royale, and executed a protective maneuver that was both practiced and instinctive. She wrapped her arms around Princess Anne's shoulders and pulled her down and away from the drone's trajectory, using her own body as a shield. They fell together onto the soft grass beside the rosebed, Sarah positioning herself on top to provide maximum protection. In the same instant, James had drawn his weapon and was tracking the drone, trying to get a clear shot without risking hitting anything beyond his target. The drone adjusted its path, compensating for the sudden movement of its target with an agility that confirmed Sarah's worst fears. This was no amateur operation. The device was being controlled by someone with skill, someone who was actively pursuing Princess Anne even as the situation unfolded. The implications were terrifying. Whoever was operating this drone could see what was happening in real time, which meant they were likely watching from somewhere nearby. Close enough to maintain direct line of sight control, James fired 3 shots in rapid succession, the sharp cracks echoing across the peaceful gardens and sending birds scattering from nearby trees. The first shot missed, but the second clipped one of the drone's rotors, causing it to wobble violently in the air. The third shot struck home, hitting the main body of the device. The drone's remaining rotors sputtered and failed, and it plummeted to the ground approximately 15 feet from where Sarah and Princess Anne lay in the grass. The entire incident had lasted less than 10 seconds from the moment Sarah first heard the buzzing until the drone crashed to the ground. But in those 10 seconds, everything had changed. The illusion of safety at Balmoral had been shattered, and questions were already multiplying faster than answers could be found. Additional protection officers were racing toward their position now, having heard the gunshots and received emergency alerts on their communication devices. Sarah remained over Princess Anne, shielding her until she could be certain the threat had passed. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding her system, but her hands remained steady and her focus sharp. She was still in protection mode, still processing potential secondary threats. Princess Anne, to her credit, remained remarkably calm. This was a woman who had survived a kidnapping attempt in 1974, who had competed in the Olympics, who had spent decades in situations that required grace under pressure. She understood immediately what had happened and why Sarah had acted as she did. As Sarah finally helped her to her feet, Princess Anne brushed grass from her jacket and spoke with characteristic composure, thanking Sarah for her quick action, even as security teams swarmed around them. The crashed drone lay in the grass, one of its rotors still twitching intermittently. James approached it cautiously, his weapon still drawn, treating it as potentially explosive until the bomb disposal unit could examine it. Within minutes, the area was cordoned off, and Princess Anne was escorted rapidly back into the castle, where secure rooms could be sealed and additional security measures activated. Castle staff who had heard the commotion were being questioned about what they had seen or heard. Witnesses reported the gunshots, the sudden rush of security personnel, but no one had noticed anything unusual before the incident. No suspicious individuals, no unfamiliar vehicles in the area. Whoever had launched this drone had done so without attracting attention, which suggested planning and possibly even reconnaissance of the estate's security patterns. Detective Chief Inspector Robert Dalton of the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Command arrived by helicopter within 40 minutes of the incident. A stern man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Dalton had investigated threats against the royal family for over 2 decades, but this was unprecedented in his experience. The sophistication, the boldness, The direct assault on a member of the royal family in one of their most protected private spaces represented a new, disturbing evolution of the threats they faced. The bomb disposal team, dressed in full protective gear, carefully examined the crashed drone using robotic arms and scanning equipment before finally approaching it directly. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the investigation. The drone had been modified extensively from its commercial origins. Attached to its underside was a small package, containing what preliminary analysis identified as a military-grade plastic explosive, enough to cause serious injury or death to anyone within a 10-foot radius. The detonation mechanism appeared to be proximity-based, designed to trigger when the drone came within a specific distance of its target. This was not a prank or a surveillance operation gone wrong. This was an assassination attempt, carefully planned and technologically sophisticated. Someone had tried to kill Princess Anne using a weaponized drone, and they had come terrifyingly close to succeeding. If Sarah Mitchell hadn't reacted within those crucial seconds, if James Thornton hadn't managed to shoot the drone down, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The investigation expanded immediately. Counter-terrorism units were mobilized. The airspace over Balmoral and surrounding areas was restricted completely, and a massive search operation was launched to find the drone's operator. Technical specialists began analyzing the device itself, looking for any clues that might identify its origin or the person who had modified it. Serial numbers had been filed off, but modern forensics could often recover such information from microscopic traces. The electronic components would be examined for fingerprints, DNA, or any other identifying markers. The explosive material would be analyzed to trace its source. Meanwhile, in a secure conference room deep within Balmoral Castle, Princess Anne sat with Dalton and other senior security officials, providing her account of the incident. She described hearing Sarah's warning shout, the sudden movement as she was pulled to the ground, the sound of gunfire. She had not seen the drone herself until after it had crashed. Her demeanor remained composed, but those who knew her well could detect the underlying tension. She was angry that someone had dared to attack her in this sanctuary, violated that her family's place of peace had been turned into a battlefield. The question that dominated every conversation was simple but critical. Who was behind this attack? Theories multiplied rapidly. Terrorist organizations had long viewed the royal family as symbolic targets. Anti-monarchy extremists had become increasingly vocal in recent years. Foreign actors might see value in destabilizing Britain by targeting its most prominent family. Or this could be the work of a disturbed individual, someone with a personal grievance or delusional motivation. Each possibility led to different investigative paths, different security implications. Sarah Mitchell found herself at the center of attention she neither wanted nor expected. She had simply done her job, responded to a threat as she had been trained to do. But in those crucial seconds, her actions had quite literally saved a life. Princess Anne personally thanked her again in the private meeting, acknowledging the debt she owed to Sarah's vigilance and courage. The moment was emotional for Sarah. It's the reality of what had almost happened finally hitting her now that the immediate danger had passed. King Charles was informed immediately and decided to cut short a visit to Scotland's Western Isles to return to Balmoral. The security implications for the entire royal family were enormous. If someone could launch a drone attack at Balmoral, no royal residence could be considered truly safe. Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, Sandringham, all would need their security protocols revised and enhanced. The era of drone warfare had arrived at the gates of the monarchy. And traditional security measures designed for ground-based and human threats were suddenly inadequate. As night fell over the Scottish Highlands, teams of investigators continued their work. Forensic specialists examined the crash site under powerful lights. Intelligence analysts pored over data from security cameras and radar systems. Digital forensics experts began the painstaking process of tracing the drone's electronic components. And throughout it all, the question remained unanswered. Who had tried to kill Princess Anne? And were they planning to strike again? The investigation into the drone attack intensified as dawn broke over Balmoral on September 15th. Detective Chief Inspector Dalton had barely slept, coordinating with multiple agencies throughout the night. The Metropolitan Police, MI5 Scotland Yard's, Counter-Terrorism Command, and even international intelligence partners were now involved in. what had officially been classified as an attempted assassination of a senior member of the royal family. The scale and sophistication of the attack demanded a response that crossed traditional jurisdictional boundaries. Technical analysis of the crashed drone revealed disturbing details. The device had been built using components purchased from at least 7 different online retailers across Europe. It's a deliberate strategy to avoid detection through bulk purchases. The explosive material was traced to a batch stolen from a construction site in Belgium 3 months earlier, theft that had been investigated but never solved. The detonation mechanism was custom-built, showing expertise in electronics and weapons systems that suggested military or specialized technical training. This was not the work of an amateur. The control signal that had guided the drone was traced back to a frequency commonly used by commercial drone operators. But the signal itself had originated from somewhere within a 2-mile radius of Balmoral Castle. Search teams had spent the night combing through forests, checking abandoned buildings and interviewing anyone who lived or worked in the area. They found tire tracks near an old logging road approximately 1.5 miles northeast of the castle, consistent with a vehicle that had been parked there recently. Cigarette butts discovered nearby were collected for DNA analysis. Though it would take days to process the results and compare them against existing databases, Princess Anne had been moved to a secure location within the castle immediately after the attack, and her schedule for the following days was cancelled. This frustrated her immensely. She was scheduled to visit a local hospital and attend a charity event for farmers affected by recent flooding. Canceling meant disappointing people who had been looking forward to her visit. Organizations that depended on royal patronage for visibility and support. But security officials were unanimous in their insistence that she remain out of public view until the threat could be properly assessed and neutralized. Sarah Mitchell reported for duty that morning despite having been offered time off to recover from the traumatic incident. She couldn't sit idle while questions remained unanswered and threats potentially still existed. During her debriefing with senior investigators, she walked them through every detail she could remember. The sound of the drone's approach, its flight pattern, the way it had adjusted course when she moved Princess Anne. That last detail particularly concerned the investigators because it confirmed their suspicion that the operator had been watching in real time, controlling the drone with precision and adapting to changing circumstances. James Thornton, the officer who had shot down the drone, was also commended for his quick action and accurate shooting under pressure. Taking down a fast-moving drone with a handgun was no easy feat, requiring not just marksmanship, but the ability to calculate trajectory and lead the target appropriately. His 3 shots, fired in rapid succession, had been textbook execution of a nearly impossible task. But James took no satisfaction in the praise. He was troubled by how close they had come to failure, how differently things might have ended if Sarah had been even a second slower or if his shots had missed their mark. As investigators worked to trace the physical evidence, intelligence analysts were pursuing a different line of inquiry. They examined recent threats against the royal family, looking for any that mentioned drones or showed technical sophistication. The royal family received hundreds of threatening communications each year, ranging from harmless cranks to genuinely concerning expressions of violent intent. Most were investigated and dismissed, but some individuals remained on watch lists as potential threats. Each of these people now became a priority for reinvestigation. One name that surfaced early in the intelligence review was Marcus Webb, a 47-year-old former British Army soldier who had been dishonorably discharged 8 years earlier following a violent incident. Webb had explosives training from his military service and had made several anti-monarchy statements on social media over the past 2 years. He lived alone in a rural area of northern England and worked as a freelance drone photographer, giving him both the skills and equipment to potentially carry out such an attack. A team was dispatched to locate and interview him immediately at the same time. International intelligence services were checking their databases for any chatter about attacks on British targets. The United States, France, Germany, and Israel all shared information about known extremist groups or individuals who had expressed interest in drone-based attacks. Several names emerged, including a cell of anti-monarchy activists who had been monitored by French intelligence after making threatening statements following Queen Elizabeth's death. These individuals had scattered across Europe, and tracking their current locations became a priority. Back at Balmoral, additional security measures were being implemented at extraordinary speed. Anti-drone technology was being installed around the estate's perimeter, including radio frequency jammers that could disrupt drone control signals and radar. Systems specifically designed to detect small, unmanned aircraft. Armed officers trained in counter-drone tactics were being brought in from military units. The Royal Air Force was maintaining constant air patrols over the area. Balmoral was being transformed from a peaceful highland retreat into something resembling a military installation. King Charles held a private meeting with his sister, expressing his concern and relief that she had survived unharmed. The incident had shaken him deeply, not just because of the danger to Anne, but because of what it represented for the entire family. His sons, William and Harry, their children, everyone connected to the monarchy now faced this new and terrifying threat. Traditional security protocols that had protected the royal family for generations were suddenly obsolete in an age when an attacker could launch a weapon from a kilometer away with nothing more than a commercial drone and malicious intent. Princess Anne, characteristically, was more focused on the practical implications than on her own emotional response to nearly being killed. She wanted to know what could be done to prevent similar attacks in the future, what technologies existed to counter the drone threat, and how security protocols would need to evolve. She suggested that all members of the royal family receive briefings on drone threats and personal security measures they could take. Her pragmatic approach was typical of her personality, but those close to her could see the strain in her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders that betrayed the impact of the experience. By mid-afternoon on September 15th, police had located Marcus Webb at his home in Cumbria. A tactical team approached his property with extreme caution, prepared for the possibility that he might be armed or have additional explosives. When they breached the door, they found Webb sitting at his kitchen table, appearing confused and cooperative. His home was searched thoroughly, revealing several drones and photography equipment, but nothing that suggested involvement in the Balmoral attack. His drones were all accounted for, none matching the model used in the attack. His alibi for the time of the incident was solid. He had been conducting a commercial photography shoot for a real estate company, with multiple witnesses and time-stamped digital images to prove it. Despite his anti-monarchy statements and military background, Webb appeared to be a dead end. The investigation was following dozens of other leads simultaneously. Credit card records were being analyzed to identify anyone who had purchased the specific combination of components used in the attack drone. Border crossing records were being examined for individuals with known extremist connections who had entered the UK in recent weeks. Social media monitoring systems were scanning for any boastful claims or hints about the attack. Every piece of digital communication that mentioned the royal family or Balmoral was being flagged and reviewed. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the cigarette butts found near the tire tracks was completed. The DNA matched no one in the UK criminal database, but that wasn't entirely surprising. If this was the work of a foreign actor or someone with no prior criminal record, they wouldn't be in the system. The DNA profile was shared with international partners, expanding the search globally. The tire tracks were analyzed as well, indicating a medium-sized vehicle, possibly a van or SUV, but the impressions were too degraded by weather to provide a specific make or model. As evening approached, Detective Chief Inspector Dalton convened a meeting with his senior team to assess where the investigation stood. They had eliminated some possibilities but were no closer to identifying the actual perpetrator. The sophistication of the attack suggested planning and resources that went beyond a lone individual acting on impulse. But there was no concrete evidence pointing to any specific group or organization. The electronic components in the drone had been wiped of fingerprints, suggesting the attacker had been careful about leaving evidence. The explosive material, while traced to a theft in Belgium, provided no clear connection to any particular suspect. One concerning possibility that Dalton raised was that this might have been a test run. The drone had been destroyed before it could complete its mission. But the operator had learned valuable information about Balmoral's security response times, the capabilities of the protection officers, and the vulnerabilities in the estate's defenses. If the attacker remained free, they might attempt a refined version of the assault, one that incorporated lessons learned from this failed attempt. This thought kept everyone involved in the investigation working around the clock. Driven by the knowledge that time might be working against them, Sarah Mitchell found herself struggling with the aftermath of the incident in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had performed flawlessly under pressure. But now that the immediate danger had passed, her mind kept replaying those seconds over and over. What if she had been looking in a different direction when the drone approached? What if she had hesitated for even a moment? What if James had missed with all 3 shots? The what-ifs haunted her during the quiet moments, reminding her how close they had come to catastrophe. She spoke with a police psychologist who specialized in post-traumatic stress. Not because she felt she couldn't do her job, but because she was wise enough to recognize that processing such an experience required professional help. Princess Anne requested a meeting with Sarah and James, together on the evening of September 15th, in a private sitting room. Away from the chaos of the ongoing investigation, she thanked them again for their actions. She spoke candidly about her own experience in 1974. When Ian Ball had attempted to kidnap her on the Mall in London, she had survived that incident through a combination of luck, the bravery of her protection officers, and her own quick thinking. She understood the weight that Sarah and James now carried, knowing they had stood between her and death. She wanted them to know that she recognized their courage and professionalism, and that she would never forget what they had done. The conversation was brief but meaningful. Princess Anne was not given to emotional displays, but her gratitude was evident in every word. She also expressed concern for both officers' well-being, insisting that they take whatever time they needed to process the experience, though both insisted they were fit to continue their duties. As they left the meeting, Sarah felt a profound sense of purpose renewed. This was why she had joined the protection service, why she had endured the grueling training and long hours. In those critical seconds in the Rose Garden, everything she had worked for had crystallized into action that saved a life. As darkness fell over Balmoral for the second night after the attack, security remained at maximum alert. Every shadow was scrutinized, every sound investigated. The search teams continued their work in the surrounding countryside, using thermal imaging and night vision equipment to look for any sign of the attacker or their base of operations. Intelligence analysts continued processing information from dozens of sources, looking for the pattern that would reveal the identity of whoever had tried to kill Princess Anne. And somewhere out there, the person responsible for the attack remained free, their identity unknown, their motivations unclear, and their potential for further violence a terrifying uncertainty that hung over the investigation like a dark cloud. The race to find them before they could strike again had become the most urgent priority for British security services, a race where failure was simply not an option. The breakthrough came on September 17th. 3 days after the attack, from an unexpected source, a traffic camera in Aberdeen, approximately 50 miles from Balmoral, it captured an image of a dark blue van on the morning of September 14th, heading northwest toward the Highlands. The image quality was poor, but enhancement techniques revealed enough of the license plate to run a search. The vehicle was registered to a rental company in Edinburgh, and when investigators contacted them, they discovered it had been rented 5 days before the attack by someone using the name David Mitchell and presenting what appeared to be a valid driver's license. The rental company provided copies of the documents used, and investigators immediately recognized them as sophisticated forgeries. The license number existed in the system, but the real David Mitchell was a 72-year-old retiree, living in Cardiff, who had not traveled to Scotland in years. The credit card used for the rental was also fraudulent, created with stolen information, and used only for this single transaction. Whoever had rented the van had taken extensive precautions to conceal their identity, but they had made one critical mistake. The rental company required customers to provide a phone number, and while it was likely a burner phone, it gave investigators something to trace. The phone number led to a prepaid mobile purchased with cash at an electronics shop in Glasgow 2 weeks before the attack. Store security footage was reviewed, showing a man in his 30s or 40s, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, purchasing the phone along with several other items. The footage was enhanced and analyzed by facial recognition experts, but the disguise was effective enough to prevent a definitive match with any database. However, the man's build, height, and gait were recorded and added to the profile investigators were building of their suspect. Cell tower data for the burner phone revealed its location history over the 2 weeks it had been active. The phone had been in Glasgow for several days, then moved to Edinburgh, and finally to the area around Balmoral on September 13th, the day before the attack. On the morning of September 14th, the phone had connected to a tower that covered the area where the tire tracks were found. After the attack, the phone had moved quickly south, connecting 2 towers along the A93 road leading away from Balmoral. The last signal had been detected near Perth, approximately 60 miles south of the attack site, at 3:15 in the afternoon on September 14th. After that, the phone went dead, likely destroyed by the operator to prevent further tracking. This information allowed investigators to focus their search. They now had a timeline and a route. The attacker had been in the area for at least a day before the strike, likely conducting reconnaissance and preparing their equipment. After the failed attack, they had fled south, presumably heading toward Edinburgh or Glasgow, where they could disappear into larger populations or potentially leave the country. Border security at airports and ferry terminals had been on high alert since the attack, but without knowing exactly who they were looking for. It was difficult to intercept the suspect. Detective Chief Inspector Dalton ordered a detailed review of all security footage from the A93 corridor on September 14th, between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. This was a massive undertaking involving footage from traffic cameras, business security systems, and even dashcam footage from drivers who had been on the road at that time. A public appeal was issued, carefully worded to request information about vehicles seen in the area without revealing too much about the investigation. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of calls coming in from people who had been in the Highlands that day. Among the hundreds of tips, one stood out. A lorry driver had been traveling south on the A93 around 2:30 in the afternoon when a dark blue van had passed him driving at high speed, well above the posted limit. The driver remembered it specifically because the van had cut him off dangerously, forcing him to brake hard. He had been angry enough to note the license plate, intending to report the reckless driving. When investigators checked the plate number against the rental records, it matched. They now had confirmation that their suspect had fled south immediately after the attack. With this information, investigators began checking surveillance footage from every major intersection and roundabout along the route south from Perth. The van appeared on cameras in Dunkeld, then Pitlochry, always traveling at high speed, always heading south. The trail ended at a parking area near Stirling, where the van was later found abandoned. Forensic teams descended on the vehicle, processing every surface for fingerprints, DNA, or any other evidence that might identify the operator. The van's interior had been thoroughly cleaned with industrial-strength chemicals, suggesting the suspect knew about forensic procedures. However, cleaning can never be completely perfect. Trace amounts of DNA were recovered from the steering wheel and door handle, along with several fibers that appeared to come from dark-colored clothing. More importantly, investigators found a receipt wedged between the driver's seat and center console, apparently missed during the hasty cleanup. The receipt was from a petrol station in Glasgow, dated September 12th, 2 days before the attack. The petrol station's security footage from that date was retrieved and reviewed. The cameras showed the same dark blue van pulling up to pump number 4 at 6:30 in the evening. A man emerged from the vehicle, again wearing a cap and sunglasses despite the late hour, and paid cash for the fuel. But as he walked back to the van, he turned at an angle that gave the cameras a better view of his face than the earlier footage from the electronics shop. Facial recognition analysis was run again, and this time, the system flagged a possible match. The match was to a man named Dmitry Volkov, 38-year-old Ukrainian national who had entered the UK 6 weeks earlier on a tourist visa. Volkov had a background that immediately raised red flags. According to Interpol records, He had served in the Ukrainian military with a specialized unit focused on unmanned aerial systems. After leaving the military 3 years ago, he had worked as a security consultant. Though intelligence services suspected he had actually been operating as a mercenary, selling his expertise to whoever would pay. He had been questioned by Ukrainian authorities in connection with a bombing in Kyiv but had been released due to insufficient evidence. E5 immediately began pulling together everything they could find on Volkov. His visa application had listed an address in London where he claimed to be staying with friends. Investigators raided the address, but the occupants claimed they didn't know anyone named Dmitry Volkov and had never met anyone matching his description. The apartment had no evidence of his presence. The visa application had included a phone number that was disconnected. Every piece of information Volkov had provided when entering the country was either false or led to dead ends. He had essentially disappeared into the UK, invisible to the authorities until now. Intelligence analysts began searching for any connection between Volkov and anti-monarchy groups, terrorist organizations, or foreign governments that might want to harm the royal family. His financial records, accessed through international cooperation agreements, showed several large deposits over the past year from shell companies registered in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. The money trail was deliberately complex, designed to obscure the true source. But it suggested that Volkov was working as a contract killer, hired specifically to carry out the attack on Princess Anne. The question of who had hired him became the investigation's new focus. The royal family had enemies ranging from Republican activists to Islamic extremists to foreign powers that saw Britain as an adversary. Any of them might have the motive and resources to hire someone like Volkov. MI5's international liaison team reached out to foreign intelligence services, particularly in Eastern Europe and Russia, to see if anyone had information about Volkov's recent activities or contacts. A break came from an unexpected source. German intelligence reported that Volkov had been spotted in Berlin 3 months earlier meeting with a man named Alexei Petrov, a Russian businessman with known connections to organized crime, and according to unconfirmed reports, Russian intelligence services, Petrov had been under surveillance by German authorities for suspected money laundering operations. The surveillance had captured Volkov and Petrov meeting at a cafe in the MIT district, talking for approximately 40 minutes. Directional microphones had picked up fragments of their conversation, though not enough to determine exactly what they were discussing. However, the word Britain had been mentioned multiple times, along with references to the target in September. This connection to Russian interests added a troubling international dimension to the investigation. Was this attack sponsored by a foreign government? If so, it represented not just an assassination attempt, but an act of aggression against the United Kingdom itself. The political implications were staggering. Prime Minister's office was briefed immediately, and emergency meetings of the National Security Council were convened. If Russian intelligence had indeed orchestrated an attempt on Princess Anne's life, the response would need to be carefully calibrated to address the threat while avoiding escalation into a broader conflict. Meanwhile, the manhunt for Volkov intensified. His photograph was distributed to every police force in the UK, every border security checkpoint, and every intelligence agency in allied nations. The public was not yet informed, as authorities feared that publicity might drive him further underground or prompt him to flee the country if he hadn't already done so. Airports, train stations, and ferry terminals were on high alert, with officers specifically looking for anyone matching Volkov's description. At Balmoral, Princess Anne was informed of the developments in the investigation. Learning that she had been targeted by what appeared to be a professional assassin, possibly hired by a hostile foreign power, was sobering. But she refused to alter her life significantly in response to the threat. She insisted on resuming a modified version of her schedule, attending events within secure locations, and continuing her royal duties despite the ongoing danger. Security protocols around her were enhanced dramatically, with counter-drone measures now a standard part of her protection details, equipment, and procedures. Sarah Mitchell and James Thornton found themselves at the center of media attention once news of the attack finally broke. Publicly on September 18th, the palace released a carefully worded statement confirming that there had been a security incident at Balmoral involving Princess Anne, that she was unharmed thanks to the swift action of her protection officers, and that investigations were ongoing. The statement deliberately downplayed the severity of the attack, partly to avoid causing public panic and partly to avoid giving the attackers any satisfaction from knowing how close they had come to success. The public reaction was intense. Social media exploded with speculation about who was behind the attack and why. Conspiracy theories multiplied rapidly, ranging from plausible to absurd. The incident reignited debates about the cost and necessity of maintaining a royal family, with some arguing that the security risks and expenses justified abolishing the monarchy, while others insisted that the royal family represented important continuity and tradition that Britain couldn't afford to lose. Politicians from all parties condemned the attack and expressed support for Princess Anne and the royal family. Behind the scenes, diplomatic tensions were escalating. The British government formally requested information from Russia about Alexei Petrov and any potential connections between Russian intelligence services and the attack. The Russian government issued a denial, calling the allegations baseless and provocative, and suggested that Britain was attempting to manufacture an international incident to distract from domestic political problems. The response was predictable, but did nothing to ease concerns that state actors might be involved. Intelligence analysts working the case developed several theories about motive. One possibility was that this was part of a broader campaign to destabilize Britain by attacking its most visible symbols. Another theory suggested that Princess Anne specifically had been targeted because of her military connections and patronage of various armed forces organizations, making her a symbolic target for those opposed to British military policy. A third theory, perhaps the most disturbing, was that this was simply a trial run for a larger attack, with Princess Anne chosen as a target because she was seen as less protected than more senior royals like King Charles or Prince William. As September 18th drew to a close, investigators felt they were finally making progress. They had identified their primary suspect, understood his background and capabilities, and had some indication of who might have hired him. But Volkov remained at large, his current location unknown. Whether he was still in the UK or had managed to slip across a border was uncertain. Every hour that passed without his capture increased the likelihood that he would escape justice entirely, or, worse, that he would attempt another attack. Learning from his mistakes and adapting his approach to overcome the countermeasures that had saved Princess Anne's life. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on September 20th. 6 days after the attack, a security guard at a storage facility in Newcastle reported something suspicious to local police. One of the units had been rented 3 weeks earlier by a man with a European accent who paid cash for 3 months up front. The guard had noticed the man coming and going at odd hours, always alone, always carrying equipment cases. What made him suspicious enough to call police was that the man hadn't been seen since September 14th, the day of the Balmoral attack. But the unit's alarm system showed it had been accessed briefly on September 15th at 3 in the morning, when police and counterterrorism officers raided the storage unit. They found a treasure trove of evidence. Inside were 2 additional drones identical to the one used at Balmoral, both modified to carry explosive payloads. There were also detailed surveillance photographs of royal residences, including Windsor Castle and Kensington Palace, maps with handwritten notes about security patrol patterns, and a laptop computer that would prove to be the most valuable piece of evidence recovered during the entire investigation. The laptop's hard drive contained encrypted files, but MI5's technical specialists were able to crack the encryption within hours. What they found confirmed their worst fears while simultaneously providing the breakthrough they needed. The computer held detailed planning documents for not just the Balmoral attack, but for a series of attacks, targeting multiple members of the royal family. Princess Anne had been chosen as the first target specifically because intelligence suggested Balmoral's security was less comprehensive than other royal residences. The plan had been to analyze the response to the initial attack, refine the approach, and then strike at higher-profile targets. More importantly, the laptop contained communication records with Alexei Petrov, The Russian businessman identified earlier in the investigation. The messages, exchanged through an encrypted messaging service, made clear that Petrov had hired Volkov for the operation and had paid him 300,000 euros. Up front, with another 300,000 promised upon successful completion. The messages didn't explicitly state who Petrov was working for, but the level of funding and the professional nature of the operation suggested resources beyond what even a wealthy individual could provide. British intelligence assessed with high confidence that this was a state-sponsored operation, with Russian intelligence services operating through Petrov as a cutout to maintain deniable distance from the attack. The laptop also contained security camera footage that Volkov had captured during his reconnaissance of Balmoral in the days before the attack. He had posed as a tourist, filming the area with what appeared to be a regular camera, but was actually conducting detailed surveillance. The footage showed him identifying blind spots in the security coverage, timing the patrol patterns of protection officers, and calculating the best approach angle for a drone attack. The level of planning was extraordinary, revealing a meticulous professional who had left nothing to chance except the unexpected competence and quick reflexes of Sarah Mitchell. With this evidence, investigators were able to trace Volkov's movements after he abandoned the van near Stirling. The storage unit had been accessed at 3 in the morning on September 15th, as the security system indicated. Volkov had apparently gone there to retrieve something, possibly additional identification documents or money, from Newcastle. They traced him through a combination of traffic cameras and cell tower data from a new phone he had activated. He had traveled south to London, moving quickly and avoiding major checkpoints. In London, the trail went cold for nearly 24 hours. Volkov had disappeared into the vast sprawl of the city, potentially hiding in one of hundreds of ethnic communities where someone from Eastern Europe could blend in easily. But on September 16th, his new phone had pinged off a tower near Heathrow Airport. Border security footage from that day was pulled and reviewed frame by frame. There, at 11:30 in the morning, Volkov appeared on camera in the Terminal 2 departure area, clean-shaven and wearing business casual clothing, completely different from the Capan sunglasses disguise he had worn earlier. He had been traveling under yet another false identity, this time posing as a Polish businessman named Jan Kowalski. The passport was another sophisticated forgery, good enough to pass automated checks, but not thorough enough to withstand scrutiny if authorities had known to look for him. He had boarded a flight to Frankfurt, from where he could easily connect to dozens of destinations in Eastern Europe or beyond. By the time investigators identified him on the footage, he had been gone for 4 days. International arrest warrants were issued immediately. Interpol was notified, and every Allied intelligence service received alerts about Volkov. German authorities confirmed that he had landed in Frankfurt and passed through immigration using the Polish passport. From there, the trail became more difficult to follow. Frankfurt Airport was one of Europe's busiest hubs, and Volkov could have boarded any number of connecting flights. Investigators worked to identify which flights he might have taken, but without certainty about his destination, they were essentially searching for a needle in a haystack. The political fallout from the investigation's findings was immediate and severe. The British government summoned the Russian ambassador and presented evidence of Russian involvement in the plot. The ambassador continued to deny any state involvement, claiming that Petrov was a private citizen whose actions didn't reflect Russian government policy. But the denials were unconvincing given Petrov's known connections to Russian intelligence services. The incident created a new crisis in already strained relations between Britain and Russia. Prime Minister addressed Parliament on September 21st, providing a carefully sanitized version of events that confirmed an attempt on Princess Anne's life, praised the protection officers who had saved her, and announced new measures to enhance security for the royal family. The speech was forceful but measured, making clear that Britain would respond to this aggression without specifying what form that response would take. Behind closed doors, discussions were taking place about economic sanctions, diplomatic expulsions, and covert operations to disrupt Russian intelligence activities in the UK. Princess Anne herself made a public appearance on September 22nd. Attending a charity event in London under extraordinary security measures, She wanted to demonstrate that she wouldn't be intimidated or driven into hiding by those who wished her harm. The event was brief and carefully staged, but her presence sent a powerful message about resilience and the continuation of royal duties despite threats. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive, with crowds gathering outside the venue to cheer her arrival and departure. Sarah Mitchell and James Thornton were both promoted and received commendations for their actions during the attack. Sarah was awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal for her split-second decision to shield Princess Anne with her own body. James received the Queen's Commendation for bravery for shooting down the drone under extreme pressure. Both awards were presented in a private ceremony at Windsor Castle, with Princess Anne personally thanking them once again. The ceremony was emotional, particularly when Princess Anne spoke about the debt she owed to both officers and the broader message their actions sent about the dedication of Britain's security services. The investigation into the broader conspiracy continued. Alexei Petrov was arrested by German authorities in Hamburg on September 25th, acting on a European arrest warrant issued by Britain. His arrest was the result of careful coordination between British, German, and other European intelligence services. Petrov's lawyers immediately began fighting extradition, claiming political persecution. But prosecutors were confident that the evidence recovered from Volkov's laptop would be sufficient to ensure he faced trial. In custody, Petrov initially refused to cooperate, maintaining that he was simply a businessman who had been framed by British intelligence. But as prosecutors presented the evidence against him, including the encrypted messages coordinating payment to Volkov in discussing the attack, his legal position became increasingly untenable. His lawyers began negotiating a plea agreement, with Petrov offering to provide information about who had hired him in exchange for a reduced sentence. The negotiations were complex and delicate, involving not just legal considerations, but intelligence concerns about protecting sources and methods. Meanwhile, the search for Volkov continued across multiple continents. Sightings were reported in Prague, Kiev, and Istanbul, though none were confirmed. Intelligence suggested he had likely made his way back to Ukraine, where he had connections and could potentially disappear. Ukrainian authorities claimed to be cooperating with the investigation, but political complexities related to the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe made full cooperation difficult. There was also concern that if Volkov was indeed working for Russian intelligence, they might have already spirited him away to Russia, where he would be untouchable. The technological implications of the attack led to significant changes in how the royal family was protected. Every royal residence now had comprehensive anti-drone systems installed, including detection radar, signal jammers, and even specialized weapons designed to physically intercept hostile drones. Protection officers received extensive training in counter-drone tactics. New protocols were established for outdoor events involving members of the royal family, with designated drone spotters and rapid response teams. The era of royal security had entered a new phase, one where threats could come from the sky as easily as from the ground. Security experts around the world studied the Balmoral incident as a case study in modern assassination attempts. The sophistication of the attack, the use of commercial technology for military purposes, and the challenges it presented to traditional security measures were all analyzed in detail. Several countries updated their own protective protocols for heads of state and other high-profile individuals based on lessons learned from how the attack was executed and how it was thwarted. For Princess Anne personally, the incident had a profound but largely private impact. Those closest to her noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She was perhaps slightly more cautious, more aware of her surroundings, though she continued to refuse any suggestion that she should scale back her public duties. In private conversations with family members, she spoke about the fragility of life and the importance of making the most of whatever time one has. The experience had reminded her, in the most visceral way possible, that despite all the security and protocol, danger could arrive without warning. Sarah Mitchell found that the incident had changed her perspective on her work. The abstract concept of protecting someone had become deeply personal. When she looked at Princess Anne now, she didn't just see a royal figure or a professional responsibility. She saw the woman whose life she had saved, whose weight she had felt as they fell together to the grass, whose gratitude had been expressed in words that Sarah would never forget. The bond created in those seconds of crisis was something that would connect them for the rest of their lives. As autumn progressed and the investigation continued its complex international path, as British society began processing what the attack represented. Debates raged about the role of the monarchy in modern Britain, the costs of maintaining royal security, and the question of whether prominent public figures could ever truly be safe. In an age of accessible technology and global terrorism, some argued that the attack proved the monarchy was an outdated institution that created targets without providing sufficient value to justify the security risks. Others insisted that yielding to terrorism by abolishing cherished institutions was exactly what attackers wanted, and that Britain must resist such pressures. By November, Alexei Petrov had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed that he had been approached by a contact within Russian intelligence services who had presented the operation as a way to send a message to Britain about the consequences of its opposition to Russian interests. The attack on Princess Anne was meant to be the first of several strikes. It's designed to create fear and uncertainty in British society. Petrov's cooperation provided valuable intelligence about Russian operations in Europe, though it also confirmed the disturbing reality that hostile foreign powers were willing to directly target British citizens, even members of the royal family, to advance their geopolitical goals. Dmitry Volkov was finally located in December, living under an assumed name in Moldova. His arrest came after months of patient intelligence work, tracking financial transactions and communications that eventually pinpointed his location. Moldovan authorities, working with Interpol and British intelligence, conducted a raid that captured Volkov without incident. He was extradited to the UK to face charges of attempted murder, terrorism offenses, and conspiracy to commit violence against protected persons. His trial, scheduled for the following year, would be one of the most significant terrorism prosecutions in British history. The story of the drone attack on Princess Anne at Balmoral became a defining moment in the history of royal security and a stark reminder of the evolving nature of threats in the 21st century. It demonstrated both the vulnerability of even the most protected individuals and the crucial importance of well-trained, alert security personnel who could respond effectively when seconds mattered. Sarah Mitchell's instinctive dive to protect Princess Anne and James Thornton's accurate shooting under pressure had prevented what could have been a national tragedy. For Princess Anne herself, life eventually returned to something approaching normal. Though the shadows of that September afternoon never entirely faded, she continued her royal duties with the same dedication and pragmatism that had defined her entire life of service. But there were moments when she walked through gardens or heard the distant buzz of a drone, when she was reminded of how close she had come to death, and how much she owed to two brave officers who had stood between her and that fate. The incident had tested British security services in ways they had never been tested before, and they had ultimately succeeded in protecting their charge and bringing those responsible to justice. It was a victory hard won, and a lesson painfully learned, one that would shape royal protection for generations to come.